much, Councilman. It's terrific to be here and to be back in Long Island City and just to have the chance to visit with you. You know, I can report to you that you're incredibly ably represented by the councilman who's thorough and focused and really relentless in presenting the perspective that he believes so passionately in, and that is the prospects for this area of New York City. He's a fantastic advocate for all of you and your businesses. Also, too, let me thank Gary Kestner, Gil Barron, and all of the Long Island City Partnership for organizing everything this morning. You show up and things work well, and we take all this for granted, but it doesn't happen. We have a great group here. It's well organized, and it's really all of their hard work that made this happen so we can have a successful event. Let me also thank, too, in addition to the partnership, the sponsors for this morning's event, Con Ed, Mount Sinai, Silver Cup, the Daily News, and the Queens Courier. We appreciate your support, and now let's get into it. I thought really what I would do primarily was come to friends and give you a bit more detail. People have read a lot and heard a lot about the Applied Science Initiative that Mayor Bloomberg has launched. And so today, really, I think we'll go into a bit more detail than we have historically as to how this is developed, what we think the impact will be, and how it's going to unfold, and that's really the plan. And then hopefully we'll have some time at the end of the session for questions and things on your mind or comments that I'll benefit from hearing, I'm sure. But before we do that, and before we jump in, let me just give you some context for how we think about these issues at City Hall. You know, Mayor Bloomberg has asked me, and it was really a privilege about a year and a half ago to come work for him and for all the citizens as the Deputy Mayor for Economic Development. And when we think about economic development in New York City, we really imagine really four pillars for how we think about things. One, we think that a foundational aspect is basically focusing on a strong quality of life. And what we mean by that really is a place that you feel safe, that has good schools, parks, culture, clean water, an environmental focus, and really all the things that we want to be characteristic of our homes. The second thing we think that really fits right with this is the idea of a pro-business environment where we have sensible and effective regulation. You know, you hear both extremes. You hear people complain about the issues of overburdensome regulation, and then you also hear people talk about the need for safety and protection of people, and when you buy something, you need to know you're getting what it's represented that you're buying. You want to eat at safe places. And so regulation, there's a tension here between these two, and I think that what the mayor wants to do is get this balance right and have it be leaning a little bit towards the pro-business side so we can encourage the growth. And as he says regularly, that really the driver for the economic future isn't the government, it's the government creating a field where the private sector can really drive things forward. And that's really a belief that he has and continually refreshes to all of us. The third foundational aspect is really the idea of investing in the future and thinking about infrastructure as something that we can't stop for a second investing in. Whether this is transportation, and whether that includes subways, ferries, things like that, bus systems, or whether it's office space, where we see what's going on not just in Queens, but also in the other parts of New York too, that there are things going on in Hudson Yards and Lower Manhattan, downtown Brooklyn, in addition to the success that we all know firsthand here in Long Island City. I also think too that this idea of infrastructure is part of the aspect of housing, where you look at Hunters Point South and you see what's going on there, and you can see that's a commitment that the mayor takes quite seriously also. So then the fourth, though, of these cornerstones is really what we're going to focus on this morning as we jump forward, and that is really the fourth cornerstone being innovation and economic transformation, where the mayor really tries to take his gaze up from the problems of today and out to the future and to his vision of what he wants New York to be like down the road. And so this longer gaze is what it's easy not to do that, to be honest. I think when you go to City Hall and your phone rings and someone has an issue that requires attention today, and so I think the natural tendency is to pull your vision down to focus on the issues just in front of you. But Mayor Bloomberg has really had a consistent theme that we also need to raise our gaze and look further down the road and to basically think about the things that can really make a difference for the long term. And if you kind of take that backdrop, the mayor talks about the idea of the economy transforming. And for me, I kind of thought about this way, and you know, I like history, and so you put a perspective on things, is that for about 3,000 years, we've had an agrarian economy, and then for 300 years, we've had an industrial economy. And now, just to make the numbers easy, for 30 years, we've really transitioned into more of an information-driven economy. And that's really the key issue. And some of the skills that were winning skills in the industrial economy really are not as clear they're going to be the winning skills in the information-driven economy. So how do we adjust the way we think about things and organize ourselves so that we can be better prepared? And we think New York City is the place that needs to be on the front foot with regard to this. Because we've been a city of innovation, we've figured out ways to change and to adjust how New York responds to the different opportunities that present themselves and the challenges. And so when you look and see the pioneers that have innovated here in New York, and we mentioned on this chart, Fulton, Edison, Bell, Pfizer, you know, we can see the changes that these made and resulted in a successful economy, great jobs, rising standard of living, and things like that. And so, but what we're fearful of is that this next adjustment, which has been going on, but certainly is just beginning, is this idea of the transformation of our economy to more of an information-driven economy. And one where it's not just an industrial-driven, but information-driven. And we've seen that certain areas of the country seem to have gotten on the front foot with regard to this issue pretty quickly. And whether it's Boston or Silicon Valley, then you basically see that these are places that seem to have the right seeds for the future for how to shape things. And so really the mayor challenged us in City Hall to think about the idea of how do we help the city make this transition to this next type of the economy. And just to put this in perspective, the last point there is one that was really just floored me, and that is that if you look at the companies that have been started by people that either went to MIT and applied sciences and engineering or on the faculty at MIT, then the value, the sales of those companies today equal the combined revenues of all those companies equal the GDP of Brazil. So basically the idea is this is really important. If you get it right, the effect that you can have on our economy to keep it growing is really salutary that we need to, this warrants our focus. And so we kind of backed up and said, what are the key ingredients to try to make this change? And when I kind of reported to you that we think places like Silicon Valley and Boston have been on the gaining ground in these areas, one of the things they have in common is this strong applied science and engineering focus in higher education. Now, if we step back and look at our assets, we have a good hand of cards, to be honest. You know, New York City, and no one ever says this, but I like it, I think it's kind of a fun thing to say, is New York City's college town. And if you look across, we have more post-secondary students than any other place by a substantial amount. And in fact, we have more than twice the number 2 person. So if you think about it, we are a college town. And as I tell people that we have more post-secondary students than Boston has people. So I don't understand why Boston gets the moniker of being the college town when we have twice as many students as they have people. But that's something we have to focus on and sell ourselves. I think, though, that if you, this is a good situation that we have. As I said, I think we have a good set of cards in our hand. But we have a broad spectrum of higher education opportunities here. We have the highly selective schools like NYU and Columbia. We have commuter colleges, which really serve a broader perspective. And then we also have some of the community colleges, which are teaching very important skills. So the spectrum of the breadth of what we have to offer here in New York in higher education is quite strong. But I think if we basically speak truth to ourselves, which is always sometimes a bit hard, that if you look at a heat map of all of our educational characteristics, the reality is that there's a weakness relative to the size of our economy. And that is that despite the large numbers, that the amount of people we have studying science and engineering is dramatically lower than some of these other places, especially relative to the size of our economy. And this reflects itself in several different ways where you can see this presentation. First, if you look on the first side of the slide, is if you look at the R&D per capita, then you can see we lag behind. And if you look at the percentage of the workforce employed in engineering, you can see we're way off to the right, which is not where we would wish to be. And so the idea that Silicon Valley has 4 times the concentration of engineering as a percentage of its workforce, I think is an unattractive aspect as we do what I said to raise our gaze and look down the road. That's not what we would wish it to be. We'd like this part of our economy to be stronger, because we think that's a large fulcrum for improving things as opposed to lower. So Mayor Bloomberg took this idea, or this kernel of what we needed to do, and said, how can we try to change that in a way that will basically think about this in a special way. So last year, 14 months ago in December, we organized, and we didn't think we were experts, but we really developed the idea that we wanted to invite schools to respond to the first proposal, and the councilman knows all these acronyms very well, but the first way we wanted to learn about this idea. So we put out an RFEI, which is government speak for Request for Expression of Interest. And really, what we wanted to do is to ask people to tell us what they thought of the idea of we inviting people to come to New York to establish an applied science and engineering campus. So this is the first step that we did in December of 2010. And so we issued that, and lo and behold, we had a fantastic response. We basically heard from 27 institutions from all over the world. You can see a picture of some of them, and we learned a lot. You know, I'm not an academic administrator, and so to have the brightest people tell us what they thought about our idea was really very, very helpful. And what we then did is we issued later in the summer of last year, we crafted, with the information we learned from the RFEI, we organized an RFP, which is a more formal request for proposals. So you go from learning about the idea and getting feedback from other people to then crafting it into a proposal. And that was the RFP, which we issued last July. And that basically outlined that we thought this was a good idea. We said to the potential respondents, this is exactly what we'll do. Well, there are three things we're committed to do to make this work. Number one, we'll provide capital, money. Up to $100 million could be provided if we thought the ideas warranted it. Number two, we also suggested real estate. And we proposed three specific areas that you can see on the map here. One in Staten Island, one in Brooklyn, and one here, and one on Roosevelt Island. And that's the one we're talking about today. We also said, though, that if anyone had an idea of where they'd like to build it someplace other than any of these three, that we'd be happy to discuss it with them, but the city controlled these three sites, so we could help to facilitate the transition better in those cases. And we also said that we would provide information, technical assistance on how to get through the city processes and things like that. And so that was the idea. The responses were due. We issued this in July, the RFP, and people were asked to respond by October when we looked forward to hearing from all of them. And as you might expect, as it became clear that this was going to be a very serious venture, the amount of money that the schools would have to put up would be substantial in their commitment, then some of the people that provided us information realized that this was a bit of a high bar, so we had a smaller, more focused group of people respond. And they came from here in New York, from in the New York region, across the country, and all around the world. And these are the people that responded. We had 7 submissions, and some of them involved more than one institution. So of the 7 submissions, it included 17 different institutions from all around the world. And they provided their perspective. So we received these in October, and the pages of all the presentations equaled 10,000 pages for us to go through from the various 7 submissions. And so the people at the Economic Development Corporation of New York City basically processed this and went through it. So each institution and each one of the people that have provided a submission had an in-depth personal interview, in fact several in most cases. And we also felt too that we, the city, would benefit from getting some perspective from outside people because, as I said, we're not academics and we've never run large institutions. So we invited people from other institutions that were not submitting proposals but knew a great deal about this to help us think about the proposals we've received. So you can see we had people from Princeton, UC Berkeley, Fordham, and also the former president of MIT, and also some business people help us think about what we learned from the 10,000 pages of submissions. And basically also then try to go through the submissions and on behalf of the taxpayers, you know, the mayor talks about this continually, but when we're spending taxpayer money, there's a tremendous burden of responsibility that we have. And to carefully analyze, if we're going to spend taxpayer money, then what are we going to get for it? And And so the parameters we considered were the economic impact, the qualifications and track record of the various respondents, and what we thought the institutional connections would be to the city. We didn't want someone to come here and view themselves as plugging in. We wanted them to become part of what was New York. And so when we went through the various proposals, we really came through with this in a strong way. So basically, on December 19th of last year, about 375 days after this program was announced, and just a little bit more than a year and 1 week, we basically announced that we had chosen as really the first recipient of any of this money to be Cornell and Technion. And they indicated that their preference was to build an 11-acre campus on the southern end of Roosevelt Island. As part of this, Cornell attracted philanthropy that was really unimaginable. One gentleman has contributed $350 million to Cornell solely and only if they build this campus. So basically, this idea served as a magnet for philanthropy for Cornell too, where people responded to this idea that they presented in lots of ways, including with their wallet. They've announced that they're also going to have specific areas of focus: media, healthcare, and the built environment. The institutions will provide joint degrees from Cornell and the Technion. There'll be more than 2 million square feet of new buildings when it's fully built. There'll be 2,500 students per year and 280 faculty at full build. And in addition, it's not just about the buildings, it's about the open space on Roosevelt Island too, where they'll maintain 500,000 square feet of that. In addition to, and that's not all, they'll focus on partnerships with public schools to enhance math and science programs for at least 10,000 students and 250 teachers every year. And there'll be, interestingly, and this was a special Cornell attribute of their submission, Cornell and the Technion, was they're also going to provide a fund of $150 million to support New York City-based startups. And the funds will only back companies that agree to be in New York City for at least 3 years. So you can see how all these pieces came together. And if you go back to my idea of saying what are the 3 things we thought about when we basically talked about the qualifications if we're going to invest in this on behalf of the taxpayers, then I think we talked about economic impact and feasibility. We talked about qualifications and track record, and we talked about the institutional connections to the city. And I think as I go down this, roll down this list of what they've committed to do, we feel like we've gotten ticks in those boxes, which are really quite exciting and are good examples of stewardship for us on behalf of the taxpayers. Now let's look at for just a second at the partnership itself with Cornell and the Technion. So basically, Cornell's a little better known. It was started about 160 years ago as part of President Lincoln's land-grant colleges. Interestingly, I always think this is kind of a fun story, that there was a view in the 1850s that we had an agrarian economy and that we needed to find ways to offer an attractive education at a reasonable price to people who wanted to transition from a farm or agrarian life to one that was a bit different. And that was the whole philosophy of the land-grant colleges. And with the Civil War still raging, basically Congress came to view this as so important that they passed the Land-Grant Act for colleges, of which Cornell was one. Cornell today is certainly a top Ivy League school, well known to everyone, with top programs in computer sciences, other engineering, material sciences, nanotechnology, and information science. And also, too, as I talked about the connection with New York, Cornell has about 50,000 alums that are in the New York area, so I think that the support for this initiative among Cornell as an institution is extraordinary. We also basically, I'd say too, I think I probably personally heard from a big proportion of the 50,000 alumni on behalf of Cornell. We were kind of going through the process, and my favorite document was the 21,000 signatures that someone sent of Cornellians who were in support of us selecting Cornell. So they were well organized in their effort to put their proposal forward. I think too, though, that interestingly enough, while it might not be as well known, that the ingredients that the Technion brings to this recipe really are quite extraordinary. You know, it's known as Israel's MIT. 1/2 of the Israeli companies listed on NASDAQ are headed by Technion grads. And basically, too, you can see the Nobels and the startups and things like that, bless you, that are around Cornell, around Technion in Haifa and throughout all of Israel. For those of you that haven't seen it, there's a book that was co-written by two people called Startup Nation, which really talks about the way in which the flywheel gets started in the whole Israeli startup area. And Dan Senior, I don't remember the second author, basically describes the way in which it's happened, and it really, the Technion is really a thread throughout all of this book. And I think it really is kind of inspirational to think about what could happen here when you think about that. So while not as well known to some of us, I think the Technion with Cornell makes this an extraordinarily strong position. I mentioned too that they've already presented to us the nature of how they want to organize their academic activities here, the threefold aspect of connected media, where they talk about things like advertising, entertainment, finance, publishing, retail, basically helping. And these are things we're strong in now, which is great because it will help us think how these industries are transforming, and basically give us the skills to see how they go. We also know that the healthier life aspect, there's really no place in the world that has a stronger academic medical community than New York City. You read these ratings of all the different places that have strong academic medical facilities, and there's no question if everybody who's here in New York with their different jerseys put on one New Jersey that said New York Academic Medicine, then we have by far the strongest and biggest team. But in fact, we have 3 or 4 institutions where some of the other places have just one. And so that's something we think is exciting. And then also the built environment, which really relates to the city and what's going on there. And you can see that's architecture, construction, energy, and transportation, all important aspects of the New York economy. So this isn't just an idea now. This is really coming to life before your eyes. We've had several very long meetings with the people from the Technion and from Cornell. It's not just the presidents, they've appointed leadership here. Dean Hutzenlocher will be moving to New York from Ithaca. He's been running the computer science department there and is a fantastic, energetic young fellow. Kathy Dove, who is coming from Cornell, is also going to be the manager and basically be responsible for leading and organizing all of these efforts, whether it's finance, the real estate, all the technical aspects of building something like this. And also the Technion has contributed to, where Craig Goddard is going to be the director of all the academic programs, and he comes to us from Technion's campus in Haifa. So then, what do they want to do? These are the leaders. What's their vision? And so you can see this picture has received a lot of publicity and been lots of places. It's a bit misleading because this is just illustrative architecture, and they announced last Monday this week, I think it was, Cornell and the Technion issued a press release saying that they've shortlisted 6 architects who will do the actual design. So this is just illustrative artwork, but they now have said that the architects they've described will be responsible for competing for the privilege of designing, being the lead organizer of the architectural elements. There's 6 firms been announced. They'll have a contest among these 6, and hopefully in short order they'll be picking that and moving forward. As you can see, it's got great proximity to Cornell's East Side Medical Center. It's got great proximity to the Central Business District of Manhattan, and even more importantly to the Central Business District of Queens, Long Island City. And so when you see how this will unfold, we see it as being transformational to Western Queens and Long Island City. And we see this area between here and Roosevelt Island being the natural place for startups and all kinds of industrial activity to occur. You'll also know, too, that this year we're going to open on the southern tip. It's not quite there on the chart. That the Roosevelt Island Four Freedoms Memorial will be opened. There's a state park. So if you just kind of close your eyes and imagine, and it's going to take a while, but if you close your eyes and imagine that what will happen is that the Goldwater Kohler facility, which is there, will be taken down, and the patients that are there now will be relocated by the time we leave office. We're getting thrown out in 663 days, not that we're counting, and so by that time we'll be able to give 8 acres to Cornell and the Technion, and if you just close your eyes and roll south, you'll go through the state park, then you'll have the ruins of the original smallpox hospital, and then transition to the Four Freedoms Park, which is being designed very close to completion at the southern piece of the island. So that's kind of what will be happening, and also too, the campus will of course be carbon neutral, and they're thinking creatively about how to make sure this is really an icon with regard to what buildings can be in the future. So then, this is the vision, and I've gone into a bit more detail than we have previously within the audience in terms of what it's going to be, the programs and things like that. But I think, too, that if we go back to where we started, my job and my title in the end, the last two words are my job in Scripture Economic Development. And so that really this is about helping be sure our economy is moving in the right direction. And we think about that basically there'll be three types of benefits from this project. The first is that we'll get to build the campus, and the good news is labor's been very supportive of this. And we believe the building of 2 million square feet over time will basically create about 20,000 plus jobs. Then, after you build the campus, you get to operate it, and this is close to 8,000 jobs. And it's interesting, most people, if you say academic, and people think professors and tweed coats and things like that, but really the reality is that to run a facility like this, probably a third to a half of the jobs will be people that are not academics. They're people that actually run the campus and make things work. And so that'll be the second point, but in total almost 8,000 jobs. And then I'll leave it to all of us together to imagine what do we think the economic effect will be long term by having this here, creating the companies and creating the environment for hopefully what we believe would be tens to hundreds of thousands of jobs and hundreds of new companies. So you can see the benefit, when we think about it, is tens of billions of dollars over the next 30 years. So you put that together with this idea that Mayor Bloomberg basically organized and used $100 million of city money and 8 acres of city-controlled property to basically launch this. It seems to us to be an extraordinarily attractive investment and outcome for New York City. And it really falls into that cornerstone I said before about longer-term initiatives and strategies to make sure that our economy transitions for the future. In terms of how it's going to happen, well, hopefully, what else is going to happen, it's not just about Cornell and the Technion. We're also continuing discussions with several other schools about doing things here in New York. And we're talking to Carnegie Mellon, Columbia, and NYU about specific projects. In the fall of this year, Cornell and the Technion will actually begin with students in the fall. They won't be doing it on Roosevelt Island. They're not sure where yet. They're having discussions with several people. But so the first students for this initiative will be in class in the autumn, which is a good thing, I think, and that's part of the driver that we wanted was to make sure this got started. As I said, we'll deliver the campus in a raw land form as we leave, and then they've committed to opening the first phase of the campus by 2017, and then you can see as we go out that the campus will be complete over the decades ahead. And so this is not a project for those who are interested in instant gratification. It really is something that will be here, we hope, for a very long time, but be transformational. You know, when you go to campuses, these are really enduring places, and I think what we want to do is to make an investment that serves as an enduring legacy for this administration, and more importantly for the people of New York. It's really something we're thinking about, and we're doing other things. I think that the mayor isn't just doing this. This is not our only effort to think about how to consider innovation and economic transformation. There are other things we're doing, and usually it falls into these three categories of capital, real estate, and talent. And in general, you know, we're spending the money with the New York City Entrepreneurial Fund. We've recently become the #2 venture capital community in the United States, passing Boston to only trail Silicon Valley. We're also thinking about how to use our real estate to be encouraging to exciting things for the economy, whether it's the Brooklyn Army Terminal in Alexandria in Manhattan, which are focused on biotech. And we also have 9 different startup incubators throughout all of the city, which we think are going. And 2, we recently are working hard on a high school that will be focused on software engineering. And this, I think, is pretty exciting, too. You know, in the 40s, right here in this borough, people recognized what was happening with the aviation industry, and there were academic programs that grew up around the idea of this transforming industry. And today, we're trying to apply that same strategy and think about software and technology as ways we should be incorporating into our education, too. And so the details here are that, that we'll be announcing the Academy for Software Engineering. It'll be a new high school and located in the Flatiron Gramercy area and supported by all the different people. We also have a recently announced P-Tech, which is an innovative high school in Brooklyn, sponsored by IBM, which basically is really, I think, an exciting public-private partnership. This is a 6-year high school, so that it's not because you're slow that it takes 6 years. It's because you get with an associate's degree, and you have each student in this high school will have a mentor from IBM who is assigned to them, and will get to know them and work with them throughout the whole arc of their 6 years in high school. And second, each graduate is guaranteed a first-line interview with IBM with regard to getting their first job. So that's a good example, I think, of trying to make this connection of the economy of the future. So let me just stop here if I can, and then if people have time or you like, I'm happy to take a couple of questions. I know everyone's got a busy day to get off, but if that's okay, we'll do that, and then call it a day. Thank you very, very much for your attention. Great. If people, will you just stand up and just indicate your name and everything, and we'll do our best.
Oh, Deputy Mayor Steele, I'm Simon Cousins from Illumina, we're a new business resident of LIC, we're a public relations agency. I wonder, given the quality of submissions to the Mayor's invitation for expressions of interest, is there any indication that there may be an opportunity for runners-up to be given space at the Navy Yards or Governor's Island?
So we're still in discussions with 3, Carnegie Mellon, Carnegie Mellon, Columbia, and NYU, and so those 3 we're talking to about doing different things, and we'll see. We don't have another $100 million, but that doesn't mean we can't find ways to either be supportive and encouraging and things like that. So the answer is yes, we agree, and we're seeing what we can do, and you know, I would be optimistic that in the next 3 to 6 months we'll have some other things to announce. This is an initiative. It isn't just a single thing. It's basically the Cornell and the Technion. It's Cornell and the Technion working with our schools, both our students and our teachers. It's working on the software engineering high school. It's working on P-Tech. It's thinking about incubators. It's really all these things tied together, trying to get us on the front foot for what we think the direction the economy is taking. Yes, sir.
Rick O'Connor, I write the Roosevelt Islander Online. My question is that the New York City does not control the entire campus that Cornell is asking for. The Roosevelt Island Operating Corporation controls a significant amount of the campus. How do you propose that Cornell or New York City acquires the land that RIAC controls?
Well, if my memory is correct, there's a 99-year lease, and so this has lots of technical aspects to it. And I think the good news is that that everyone, both RIAC, all the elected officials, have been very supportive and helpful as we figure out exactly the right way to do this. You know, it's not just a matter of what we can do or what one can do. It's a matter of developing a program that is supported and appreciative and respectful of all the different constituencies who are involved. And so that's really what we're trying to do, and there'll be twists and turns. This is a large, complicated project where Cornell is investing an incredible amount of money and effort and goodwill and taking a lot of their energy and applying it to this. So I think we want to work with everyone, and there'll be people all around who we have to be sensitive to. Thank you.
My name is Eric Barton, the founder of the Long Island City Community Boathouse. We work on boats, kayaks for free. And I'm working with LaGuardia Community College now for an educational boating program. I'm wondering if you're looking at the maritime infrastructure of Roosevelt Island, if you're going to be having links for ferries and things like that to feed this growing environment, and also if there's spillover, if the campus itself grows, or also we keep talking about these startups that could spin out of it, are you looking at Long Island City as a nearby incubation center for that?
So let me do it in reverse. Number one, I think that this area between where we stand and Roosevelt Island and Hunters Point South, the councilman can correct me, but I think this triangle of area is just incredibly fertile for all kinds of interesting things that can happen. You know, the zoning has been adjusted so that more things can happen because of the good leadership that you have. So I think that the theme that you're pointing at in your last perspective of what can happen in the future in this area, pardon me, is incredibly exciting. That's point one. Point two is you raise the issue of, and I think it will be residential, commercial, academic, all kinds of things that you can imagine occurring in this area. Number two is that the issue you raise about maritime issues and opportunities. So we spent a lot of time at City Hall talking about a completely enhanced and expansive waterfront plan. There are lots of things we're working on, but the ones that have probably gotten the most publicity is really the East River Ferry Service. And as you know, this is a temporary program that's funded for 3 years. We've been at it for about 9 or 10 months, 8 or 9 months, and it has exceeded our expectations by at least double. And that doesn't count the free month when it started. It only begins when people started paying. I think we've been helped a little bit by the weather, but we were basically tracking at a substantially higher rate way before positive weather helped. We won't make any final observations or conclusions until we see a full year of data at least. But I think the exciting thing is that ferry service on the East River looks like a winner. So then the next question you should pull on me about is how do you make that permanent and where else should you take it? And so that leads me back to your first question of the three, which was waterfront activity on Roosevelt Island. And here, that's something we're thinking about. It's complicated. I'm not an engineer of this type, but my impression is that the only potential dockable place is on the eastern side of Roosevelt Island, in the narrower place, and we're doing some work on where that might happen, how it might be, and things like that. And so whether that leads to getting people on the water, that certainly is something we're interested in, which given your interest is what you'd like to hear. So the idea of our expansive waterfront plan is getting people on the water. This would certainly be part of all that too. So I think those are the three things you spoke about. Yes.
Stuart, so now Silvertip Studios. Will the city or will Cornell Technion have to go through a full ULURP and EIS to deliver the master plan?
So we're working with them on that. I think that they'll have to go through the full processes, and we'll work with them on that. I think the third point that I don't think can be undervalued is that that helping them with the technical issues they have to deal with. This is a complicated place to build, as many of you know. And for us to have to work through that, and I think the good news is the elected officials have been very helpful and supportive, and they need to do what they should do as good citizens, would be my first point. And number two, we should help them work through that the best we can. Is that fair, Councilman? I think that's the right answer. And I think that's what they want to do too. No one's looking to shortcut or to throw a pitch when no one's looking. It's, you know, they announce the architects, they announce what they're doing, we're getting feedback, and I'm sure lots of people will have a perspective I'll look forward to sharing with us. But it's exciting.
Okay. Thank you.
But thank you very much.
Deb May has to do another appointment, but we just want to thank him. He's clearly raised the bar on New York City Deputy Mayor We have some other events coming up. Please continue to network, and we'll see you in next month. Thank you.